Hello class, this is my video reflection for week 11. I've decided for this reflection, I will share with you the wisdom of my CT. She has been a great role model and advisor for the week spent observing, assisting, and teaching in her class at Bloomington Junior High School. Rather than tell you what she has to say, I thought I'd give her the honor. You're about to meet my CT, Mrs. Mundell Bly. She's going to tell you a little bit about the literacy skills and challenges she encounters with her ESL students throughout the day.
Hi, I'm Kathy Mundell Bly. I'm the English as Second Language teacher at Bloomington Junior High School. I've been working with Jillian this semester, and we've done a lot of literacy projects here together, and just want to talk a little bit for her reflection about what happens in an ESL classroom. While some of the things we do here are going to look much like a traditional reading classroom, some things are also very different. We do reading, we do different types of texts, we do fiction, nonfiction, informational texts. We do a lot of persuasive reading too, all those things that tie into the things that any student would need to know for their literacy at 7th or 8th grade level. However, we can't make any assumptions about our students when they come into class either. Some of the students come with good reading skills from their own language, but not in English. So they don't have the vocabulary to be able to sit down and read a 7th grade or 8th grade level text and be able to discuss it, find some of the things we might like, a simile maybe. They don't know those words even yet. So we have to go along with what they know already and build on that. So sometimes they come in with some English, they've studied it in their own countries, and they might have a 2nd, 3rd, 4th, maybe even a 5th or 6th grade reading level, but they're not at grade level. So we need to be able to spend time building that background vocabulary and scaffolding their learning so that they're able to get up to a 7th grade level. If they come in with a 3rd grade reading level at the beginning of 7th grade, they will not, most likely, be at a 7th grade level by the time they leave the classroom. It takes an ESL student anywhere from 5 to 9 years to catch up and be at a par with their American counterparts. So it will take a while. We talk about catching the moving train. You know, they're at, say they're at a 1st grade level, but everybody else is at a 5th grade level. They're learning, they might even learn 2 grades that year. So now they're at a 3rd grade level, and everybody else is at a 6th grade level. And then, 2 years every year, it'll be the end of high school before they catch up. So that's a consideration that has to happen in an ESL classroom that really affects their literacy when compared to the American students. We also need to be aware of their cultural background. Was language and reading considered important in their home culture? What part of their country were they from? Do they even go to school? We've had students who've never been to school. Students who speak in a different, would write and read in a different script might have trouble. I think of Thai students or Chinese students who have to actually learn the English alphabet from base 1, and move on from there. So learning to read from left to right, not right to left, can be a challenge too. You end up students that are trying to read things completely backwards, and it won't make sense to them or to us. And when they then transfer that into writing, it really becomes a problem. So we spend a lot of time just getting those very basic skills that we assume everyone in junior high knows into their heads so they're able to read correctly and at a base level. Sometimes that can add to a lot of frustration.
Here you're going to hear Mrs. Bly describe some of the non-traditional literacy challenges she sees with her students at a lower level of English proficiency. Many of the ESL students at Bloomington Junior High School are proficient with English, but still struggle with fluency. Mrs. Bly talks about how one of her newest students, who moved here from Uzbekistan, has just begun learning English at BJHS. That particular student's literacy skills are considerably different, which requires her to work one-on-one with Mrs. Bly.
We have a student right now who's from Uzbekistan. We have not yet found a good Uzbekistani dictionary to use. So she does speak some Russian. School there was partially in Russian. She was very well educated in her home country, but came with no English whatsoever. So for this child, she's using an iPad. We translate things into Russian for her. She then looks at the Russian in her head, translates it into Uzbek, so she's sure she understands it, then has to translate it back into Russian, type it in Russian on the iPad, and then it gets translated into English for us to be able to see what she's saying. That's quite a process for her to go through. I mean, she's doing beautifully, but it's a lot of work. She's really doing every assignment 3 to 4 times to be able to truly understand it. So she's worn out by the end of the day. We've talked with her mom and her aunt, and sometimes she goes home and she's just exhausted. And we said, yeah, we're not surprised. What she's doing is working 4 times harder than anybody else in the school is doing right now. So that's a challenge. So to lay a text in front of her and say, let's go, let's read this 7th grade level text, that's not going to happen. We're using 1st and 2nd grade texts with her. And she's doing quite well considering the limited English she has. Now, we're 9 weeks into the school system, school year, and so she has really acquired an amazing amount of English in that time, just an amazing amount. But still, you can't move her up to a 7th grade level. You got to walk before you can run. And so we're walking, we're running some days, but at her pace. We're jogging with her as she goes along the course. And she's doing so well. And so the idea of literacy with ESL students is to give them whatever level they're at, move it up a step at a time. So they're challenged, but not overwhelmed. And then immense amounts of praise when they attain that next level. So all along the way, she's praised highly and responds quite well to that, as do most students.
Mrs. Blight also brings up some really great considerations that teachers must make for students who come from different cultures.
So literacy in my classroom might look very different than it would in a normal junior high classroom. There's a lot of vocabulary building. There's a lot of grammar, which usually goes into a language arts class, and she does get that in the language arts class she's in, but again, it's being taught at 7th grade level, so the teacher makes adaptations for her, but it's still very difficult for her to keep up. So in my classroom, we're reinforcing all those things. We're doing simple things, putting an S at the end of a verb for 3rd person singular. And why don't you need that S if you say, ask a question, does he walk instead of he walks? Where did that S go? Well, it goes to the does. But explaining that when other people's languages don't always necessarily have those. Explaining to our Chinese student, why do I need to put an S at the end of boys? If you say two boy, I know it's more than one. Yes, you do, but in English, the rule says you put an S. So some of the things that they think are very silly in English are very hard to get through their brains because they've been taught correctly in their own culture. They're able to move that to English and learn how to do it, but at first for them it seems very silly to have to do those kinds of things. So it takes a bit to get that through their heads too. So they may be writing quite well, but and good stories and good information, but when you compare it to American students writing, it may be error-filled, and yet they're writing with their own background knowledge to do it. And they do the same thing with reading. Their stories may not be told in a certain logical manner. I try to use lots of texts from their own cultures when I can get them. However, they've been translated into English, and so they're told in an English manner, and then might be more linear rather than circular, as some cultures like to do things like that. So it does look very, very different.
Now Mrs. Blight will talk a little bit about the lesson I taught in her class. Here she shares the literacy skills I focused on for the students to practice. She's quite complimentary, and I do appreciate that, but I think it's also important to take note of the subtle literacy skills ESL students are taught to practice, which may be a little less traditional from an ELA or an English language arts class.
In the lesson Miss Gagan talked, I was very pleased as I observed it. We were doing a reading about a young man who was giving a service dog, a seeing eye dog, and learning together to be able to be a team. And as they went home, then the young man would have a lot more mobility because of his dog. And the lesson's focus was on teamwork, but also on sequencing events. She went through the vocabulary with them very thoroughly, and they got the opportunity to have their word and go up on the board and put the definition there, and then everyone copied from everyone else to make sure everyone had all the vocabulary correctly, and that was really cool. They like getting up and walking on the board whenever they can, so that gave them a little bit of activity to do. It was fun for them. And then as they moved further along, she showed them a video from a service dog's perspective and trying to activate what they knew and seeing how they felt about that. And we both found it very interesting that the kids actually seemed to know quite a bit more about seeing eye dogs than we thought they would. So they did have good background for this lesson, so it was very familiar. The concept of this was familiar to them. So it wasn't like, wow, what are we talking about here? They understood what a seeing eye dog would do. So that, pulled out some of their own background knowledge. They were able to share some things about that. Miss Gagum read them the story. It's a very short story, and fairly short story. And I do the same thing frequently because sometimes, rather than them having to concentrate on those words and what's happening in the story, making sure that they're going to pronounce it correctly, it's good to just have someone read to them. They're getting to hear a fluent speaker read in a fluent manner, and that's a good model for them. And so with a short story like that, I thought that was a very appropriate thing to do with them. They then moved into the sequencing part. They made comic strips. I believe it was a 4-step comic strip of what happened first, second, third, and fourth in the story. So they were able to take their thoughts and be able to sequence it appropriately, and I believe every student did get all 4 of them appropriately, and then do a little bit of drawing with it. Sometimes, I don't ever grade them, and she wasn't looking for either for good artwork, but just the fact that they can kind of express themselves through art. Sometimes if they have trouble with the language itself, they can draw a picture of something, and you can tell what they're wanting to tell you. So it's always good incorporating some of that art in there with them. And then as they were working on those, we did some discussion about the dog and the boy and how they were going to work together, did some predicting about what would happen when they went home, I believe. And so that was also good to get the kids still thinking through that story and then progressing on past it into, what's going to happen to them, how might it be for someone else, how might it be if you had to have a seeing eye dog, those kinds of things. So I thought it was a very, very effective lesson. The kids enjoyed it. They told me the next day, in fact, that when was Miss Gagan going to do more lessons? And I thought she did just an excellent job. It was very, very well prepared, and I was quite pleased with it.